There's so much to love about Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop game where you go on incredible adventures in the greatest fantasy realm of all.
Middle-earth.
No, your imagination.
Middle-earth is in my imagination.
But if there's one thing we could do without in Dungeons & Dragons, it's that moment where your dice rolls off the table and you don't find it until days later when you step on it. And it's always a D4, the most foot-slicing kind of dice. Consider as a tonic Neverwinter, the official Dungeons & Dragons massively multiplayer online game that just added a new playable class and has undergone a huge overhaul to make it freshly accessible to new players. And which transposes a bunch of beloved experiences from D&D, but crucially does all the difficult maths for you, using computers. Here then, in this video brought to you by Outside Xtra and sponsor Neverwinter, are 7 ways Neverwinter is D&D without the dice rolls.
If there's one thing that's true about D&D, it's that the bard is beloved by every party member, or at least that the bard's charisma is so high that they assume they are beloved by every party member. No D&D video game would be complete then without a musical magician, which is why we're so delighted Neverwinter has finally done the right thing and added bards as a playable class, as part of the Jewel of the North update that just got released. Not sure why they weren't in there from the start. We're going to guess stage fright? To list the bard's qualities would be a futile endeavour because they are, of course, endless. But we'll try and pull out a few of the most charming ones. Like, for instance, how unlike every other class in Neverwinter, the musical bard fires off damage dealing and party healing spells using something called Performance Mode, which hilariously has you actually play your spells onto a musical stave. Luckily, the notation is on screen to remind you what you should be tapping, and it's possible to shortcut a selection of favourite spells so that they only take one button to deploy, so if your fingers aren't the fastest, don't fret. Fret. Just a bit of classic bard humour. Honestly, don't feel bad if you don't get it. It's high-level stuff, this. Better yet, as has always been true of Dungeons & Dragons, the bard is called upon to do just as much entertaining out of combat as in combat, which is why Performance Mode can be called up at any time for the kind of impromptu freestyle shredding that presumably every NPC in this tavern will love. Huh, not much applause. Awestruck, probably. The Bard class can follow 2 levelling paths that mirror their flexibility in D&D to serve either as aggressive damage per second party members or as healers, firing out inspiring ballads that keep other players alive. No need to thank the Bard, they do it for the music, man. Speaking of music, notation nerds will be pleased to know that Performance Mode lets you play 3 full octaves plus accidentals. So if you want to miss an endgame raid because you're busy working on an original concerto for lute, well, you have that option. Hey, the bard got over their stage fright. Personal growth. You'll love to see it.
Arguably no video game can match the fantasy worlds a player can conjure up in the theatre of their own mind. A place where anything is possible. And I have a horse. Damn, Jasper! Save some carrots for later. We have a long ride ahead of us. But you know what? Sometimes the old imagination gets tired or stuck thinking about legendary tier saddles for Jasper, and when that happens, a game like Neverwinter is able to step in and render some of Dungeons & Dragons' most iconic and venerable locations. Neverwinter doesn't operate like a traditional MMORPG in that you don't walk for miles and miles across a huge open world map. Instead, you hop between locations in speedier fashion, giving you an opportunity to ogle, for instance, Icespire Peak, which you might have quested through in the recent book, but now can see in a new light, one that reveals how the dwarves who live here are really into cubism. Guess they've been playing a lot of Minecraft. I know, no Moria bad puns, Ellen. The peak is just one location on Faerun's Sword Coast, along with Neverdeath Graveyard, which who knows, maybe you will have encountered back in D&D's 4th edition, and is brought to life in all its glory here, and by glory we mean a lot of necromancers and stinking zombies. Ew. Chult, Icewind Dale and the Underdark are just a few more of the playable adventuring hotspots that have adorned the pages of the TTRPG over its long career. So there's a real kick to be had out of sprinting through 3D versions of famous D&D locations or even stories. Take a bow, Tyranny of Dragons and Acquisitions Incorporated.
Ooh, what I wouldn't give for some interns.
Even if Jasper can't be there. Although to be honest, we have been drifting apart. Well, just scrape the burnt bits off! All right then, tomorrow you cook.
Tradition states that the best way to level up in a video game is to grind for XP. Why else do you think we killed all those Rattata in Pokemon Let's Go? For fun? Guess it was pretty fun. Neverwinter's Duel of the North module, which is the big update that came out a few days ago, reconfigures the game to reflect a different kind of leveling experience, one espoused by the 5th edition of D&D, Milestone leveling. In the tabletop version of D&D, Milestone leveling is when player characters level up and gain new abilities, not when they hit a numerical XP threshold, but when they hit a certain milestone, as decided by the DM. For instance, when 2 quests are complete, when you smash the haunted amulet, when you stop using the spell Destroy Water to avoid going to the bathroom. As I say, it's at the DM's discretion. Up until very recently, Neverwinter had a level cap of 80, which you could get to in the traditional way, namely by finishing quests or killing enemies. As of now, however, the game uses milestone leveling, which means you level up when your character completes larger objectives, or adventures, tracked in the new adventure log. There are 6 adventures, each with its own storyline, and completing them all will bring you up to level 20, the new max level, again borrowed from D&D.
We must bind its soul before it rises again! Make haste!
The hope is that by making the plot lines of these adventures more concise, you'll get to the end game faster and have a good time doing so, without having to pause the storytelling to go mince up 50 boars or make 100 Rattata sandwiches or whatever. Damn, why does that make me hungry? That's not right.
Probably the best bit of any tabletop game is making a character. Writing their backstory, choosing equipment, honing their personality before bringing them to the table to be introduced to your fellow adventurers. At which point another player will make a dumb joke like how your character always farts when they're scared, and then you're just Thwilbor the fear-farting dwarf forever. Luckily, Neverwinter is an opportunity to recreate your D&D character as you originally envisioned, before running them around a rich fantasy world in third person for 1,000,000 hours. Beyond selecting their fantasy race and one of 9 classes, there's a highly streamlined attribute selection. Which is good, because this is all time you could be spending moving around eyebrow sliders and browsing face tattoos, including, crucially, one that makes you look a little bit like Pennywise the Clown. But Pennywise probably would have a higher constitution score. Back to the drawing board. In terms of pure role-playing, Neverwinter's character creation is really neat. You can choose your character's geographic origins with prompts for what kind of life they've been living and their chosen deity affiliation. Neither affects the gameplay, but it might affect how you play, in that games like this are always more fun the more you can put yourself in the character's shoes. A particularly cool touch is a biography text box for filling out a more detailed backstory, which is visible to any online player who inspects your character, and a fine opportunity for making perhaps not your own D&D character, but one from an online series if you're into that kind of thing. Here we've made Prudence the Warlock from our very own Oxventure. Mostly to find out how Jane feels when she Eldritch blasts a bunch of skeletons to death. Feels good, turns out. Cthulhu will be pleased.
D&D just isn't the same without, say it with me, salty snacks. Oh, friends. Yeah, friends are also fine, as long as they stay out of my snacks. Likewise, while it's entirely possible to quest in Neverwinter solo, it's always more entertaining if you can find a fellow player who's interested in cleaning out the same nest of spider people as you are. It's a chance to enjoy increased damage output and to examine their gear to see if there's anything you... Oh, what the hell is that mount? Although lots of endgame activities require joining a larger squad to tackle, don't despair if you don't have anyone to quest with, as players can equip an AI companion who'll fight alongside you. There are many companions to acquire of all shapes and sizes, each boasting its own roster of powers, including the power to keep you company while questing. As my grandma used to say, you're never alone when you have a burning skull. Whether Burning Skull or 11-foot-tall Angel, your companion also fulfills another role in Neverwinter, letting you gain combat advantage. This rule is borrowed from older versions of the tabletop game, where it gives a bonus to your attack rolls when your enemy is in a bad position, like being blinded or flanked. In Neverwinter, it means your attacks land extra spicy if you work with another player or companion to surround your foe and hit them where this indicator is. Great teamwork, Flaming Skull! Keep this up and you'll earn salty snack privileges. Perhaps.
D&D characters have the unique ability to stumble into town reeking of goblin blood and drunkenly murder everyone in the tavern, while also owning a castle and carrying on them the collective wealth of about 17 empires. And while Neverwinter might have done away with XP leveling, we're pleased to report the game features that old RPG staple, a logistically improbable amount of loot, wealth and weaponry. Just as well, because as you bash and crash your way through the game's adventures, it's that immense Smaug hoard of loot that will make your character supremely customizable. Neverwinter puts a hefty emphasis on loading you up with enough unlockable items to ensure by the time you're high level, your avatar looks and feels as unique as any tabletop character, but with even more glowing. Which is to say, it plays by the first rule of fantasy loot. If it's not glowing, it's garbage. Beyond weapons and armour, you can customise your companion's loadout to a ridiculous degree. Then there are your character's boons, which are permanent character bonuses you unlock as you go, and your Paragon path, which lets you steer your character class towards a certain specialisation. For instance, the two bard paths we mentioned earlier, damage dealer or healer. The Jewel of the North update brings a new area that aims to make your character's ultimate destiny a bit clearer for new players. The Adventurers Guild, which is a single location in the hub world of the Protector's Enclave, a convenient clubhouse stuffed with useful NPCs.
Welcome to your own personal demi-plane, courtesy of Tarhun's magic.
In here there's a training room, another new feature that lets you test spell and weapon techniques in a kind of practice dimension, without any goblins having to be eviscerated. Although you have to feel sorry for training room NPC instructor Corbin. Honestly, join the Adventurers Guild, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Next thing, trapped in a pocket dimension watching noobs fight holograms. Didn't even give him any glowing armour. I'd get your union rep involved, Corbin.
The Dungeons & Dragons fictional universe is known for some of the most horrifying, iconic and creative monsters of all time. And also Spider-Horse. So it is a special treat in Neverwinter, being as it is an official D&D video game, that you get to experience some of those famous fantasy nasties up close and personal, from gnolls to trolls, all leaping out of your imagination and onto the screen, and then onto your character's vital organs en masse. From regular baddies to screen-filling bosses, you're bound to come up against foes you recognise from the papery pages of the monster manual, which always feels fun, even when you're staring down a mind flayer. So many iconic enemies! And the flail snail. Seriously, just walk around it. The famous beasts aren't limited to ones you're facing in combat either. You can find many iconic D&D monsters as mounts, like a basilisk happily tamed, or who wouldn't want to be carried around a hub city on the back of a building-sized Balgura? A large fiend, alignment chaotic evil, who probably hates having to lug you around on its shoulder like you're Fay Ray from King Kong. More like Fay Ray, F-A-E, like fairies. That one worked better written down. Speaking of monstrous mounts, if you yourself would like the honour of galloping astride a Carmine Bulette, you can head to playneverwinter.com/OutsideXtra, where the first 3,500 entries will win one of their own. Valued at $15, this mount is described as beginner-friendly, and that's about the only regard in which it could be considered friendly, seeing as its official D&D description is of a land shark that terrorises any land it inhabits. It's weirdly satisfying seeing iconic D&D monsters pop up in Neverwinter, whether they be enemies, mounts, or, balloons.
These balloons are for someone else, so beat it!
And the good thing is, Neverwinter seems to have resisted the urge to get silly with it. Oh my god, no, they put the flail snail in. The bloody mavericks. It's faster than I expected, to be fair.
So those are some of the ways that free-to-play MMO Neverwinter is basically D&D but without the dice rolly parts. Oh, and now we're done. Why not check out some of our D&D videos? We'll see you next time.